This is Andy Purewal for Boxing News. I'm joined by Dan Rafael over Zoom. Dan, it has certainly been a minute since we was last able to catch up. How are you? How's life been treating you?
I'm doing good. I know we probably got a lot to talk about since it's been a minute, like you said.
We certainly do, and I'm just going to go straight back to this past weekend. I've never, in my time covering the sport, seen somebody kick somebody during a fight. Dan, can you recall any moments of madness like that, certainly in recent times?
Well, I know you're talking about what happened in the Nick Ball fight against TJ Doheny. I can't say I've seen a guy kick another man. I saw a man bite a man's ear off. That's maybe worse than that. So, uh, no, it's an unusual thing. I was a little surprised, frankly, that if I remember correctly, not only did he obviously he didn't get penalized a point for it, or the worst thing that would have been a disqualification. I don't know if he did he even get a hard warning. I mean, you just can't do shit like that.
Not as far as what I saw. He seemed to be about the ref just kind of instructed him to go back to his corner after it
Yeah.
happened.
I mean, it was kind of like in our parlance here in the United States, if you're watching basketball and it's like there's two fouls, it's like no harm, no foul, and like both guys just they say just go back and don't do it again, basically. Because yeah, he did kick him, kick Doheny, but Doheny had him in a headlock, like out of the clinch, and he was obviously frustrated. The round was over, and I think when he finally released him from the headlock, it was just sort of like, hey, yo, and he threw the kick at him. I don't think he was trying to hurt him or damage him or anything like that. It wasn't a great move. I don't like to see that, but I understood the frustration. So because of the fact that Doheny put him in the headlock and then Ball reacted with the kick when he was released, it seemed to me anyway that was the referee just saying, look, okay, both guys got away with their nonsense and let's go rest for a minute. And then he did tell them to knock off the shit later on in the fight. So again, I don't approve of the kick. I don't approve of the headlock either, though. So, but it's a fight. Stuff happens, and I thought a warning was definitely a hard warning would have been appropriate. A point deduction, I wouldn't have even been upset about. It didn't rise to a level, in my opinion, of a disqualification. So, at the end of the day, the fight continued, and the best man won. And sometimes in boxing, like in any sports, sometimes it's a call that you don't make. You have to know as an official what you should call and maybe what you should just let slide or not worry about, that you can't also get caught up in the heat of the moment. So, it wasn't a great situation, but I think in the end it didn't really have any bearing on the event.
No, 100%. Then obviously in the end he didn't change the course of the fight, and Nick Ball took it out of the judge's hands with that. Ultimately, TJ Doheny deemed not able to come back out at the end of the 10th, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, like looking towards the future, I know Nick, he wants unifications. He spoke about Stephen Fulton. He wants that WBC belt because of obviously the past history of Ray Vargas, even though he's moved on now. But there's been a lot of talk about Inoue. Um, can you foresee how a path could line up where we do see Inoue-Ball towards the back end of this year? Because I've seen, and you've seen yourself, Turkey Al Sheikh mention Inoue boxing in Saudi in December time.
Oh, absolutely. I think that that's a likely thing to happen. But there's stuff that has to happen before now and then because both of them are going to fight other fights. And in boxing, a lot of times, the best laid plans go awry because they make grand plans and something happens, especially a loss or, something along those lines. But usually a loss that derails these types of plans. And it's not like each guy's going to have one interim fight and we're going to do the match. They got to make a deal, which I think they can. I mean, I think Turkey's involvement it's not like the money won't be there to have them fight each other. I think it's a fight that would probably interest the public. It certainly is going to interest Nick Ball. I believe it would interest Inoue to be able to win a title and get another weight class if he moves up to featherweight, which has always been the plan, longer range for him. But there's hurdles. He's got to beat Cardenas in May 4th in Las Vegas. That's number one. Then he's supposed to go back to Japan and have a fight in mid-September against MJ Akhmadaliev, which is his WBA mandatory. He's also the regular title holder. Their sides have been working on or have made a step-aside deal because they were going to press the issue with the WBA to not allow the Cardenas fight, but with Akhmadaliev now on deck to be after that fight, they're not going to press that issue. So according to Akhmadaliev's manager, this is going back a couple of days ago, so I don't know what happened. Maybe it's already gotten done. But at that time, when I spoke to him a few days ago, they were in the process of making that deal to have the step aside. So that's an important factor. And then Nick Ball, who won, is going to fight again in the summer. Frank Warren said he's not going to keep him on ice. My understanding is they already have the arena in Liverpool on hold for an event in August. and that'll be that. So you got 3 fights the guy's got to win, right? 3 fights, that's not an easy factor. So there's a lot of shit that's got to happen, and then everybody's got to come out healthy. And then it's still aggressive if Inoue fights in September after will have been his 3rd fight this year. Because remember, he also fought already earlier this year against the late replacement Yoon. There's 3 more fights that have to happen, and the guys have to come out uninjured. So it's an aggressive plan, but if they can somehow navigate all of that, it does make a lot of sense for the end of the year, or as Frank mentioned, post Ball and Doheny, that it even could stretch into the early part of next year. But I definitely, the original thing you mentioned was, is there a pathway? And there absolutely is a pathway to make that happen.
Just on that Nick Ball front, then, and you mentioned, to your knowledge, there's a hold there in Liverpool in August for him to return. If that was to be the case, it would certainly be a surprise if there was to do a unification there because of the title holders and where they're currently situated. So would you expect that to be mandatory?
I mean, I don't know if I expect it to be the mandatory. I'm not sure the mandatory has been called, but it most likely wouldn't be a unification for a lot of different reasons. I think it's not even, if it's not a unification, which it probably wouldn't be, mandatory or otherwise, they'll find an opponent appropriate that's, a decent opponent. Like, look, TJ Doheny was not the top fighter in the division, but he's a reputable guy. He's a former world champ. Yes, he was coming off of a knockout loss to Inoue, but it was sort of a weird one because it was not because he got knocked out. It was an injury to like his hip or his back or something like that. And they went and did the match. And, in retrospect, it was perfectly legit because Doheny gave him a good fight, won a couple of few rounds early in the fight. And, they'll find somebody for Nick to fight that's reputable, that it's not going to be a disgrace. I mean, one thing about the folks at Queensberry is that when it comes to those types of main events, they usually come up, their matchmakers do a good job and come up with a very reasonable opponent for him to fight. Now, especially if you got a Inoue fight on deck, they're not going to go crazy and put Nick in, ridiculous harm's way, understandably.
Obviously, Nick Ball, prior to his last couple of defences in Liverpool, he was a bit of a fan favourite. It certainly seemed like it of Turkey El Sheikh's boxed back to back out in Saudi Arabia. And let's move on to that talk. TKO Boxing, Dana White entering the boxing world, and their plans to try and create what seems to be an umbrella system similar to that of the UFC. Dan, do you think it's feasible to create such a league and overcome the many obstacles which could be in front of it and ultimately become just that one boxing promoter who dominates the sport?
Listen, that's what they're going to probably try to do, but boxing is not about one promoter. I mean, I just I know that people want to compare what UFC has become in mixed martial arts and believe or think that they will try or hope to replicate that system in boxing. But the key difference is that when UFC was founded, yeah, the sport existed, but it was a lot more raw. They had to do a lot of different reforms. They had to add weight classes. There was lots of changes, and they were in the infancy of the development as it went along. So they were there from the ground up, and it became a developed sport, a international sport, a popular sport, a real ticket selling type sport, pay-per-view type entity on their watch. And they were able to build it the way it has become. They're coming into boxing with it already established around the world with promoters everywhere in every corner of the world. And to think that one entity is going to suddenly, right now, they don't have any fighters. They don't have any matchmakers. As Dana White said to me in an interview, we need matchmakers. We need the logistic people. We need to sign fighters. They have no broadcast deal. And I'm very confident because they're smart people that are working with them. They're going to get all of that handled. They're going to get a broadcast deal. And they're going to find the right people to do their events and matchmaking and that sort of stuff. But just because they're going to develop what they're going to do, and even if they start signing fighters who are free agents or amateurs coming into the pros, that type of thing, you can't just snap your fingers and suddenly have a group of great fighters. I mean, it takes time to develop. Meanwhile, all the entities that we know about, the Queensberries and Matchrooms and Top Rank and Golden Boy and PBC, and jump over to Mexico with, Box Stars and Zanfer Promotions, and, take a trip over to Japan with Mr. Honda and Tekken Boxing, and go down to Australia with No Limit Boxing, and go back to Europe and, in the UK, Boxer and Wasserman. And you go to other countries in Europe. You go to Italy with, OPI. I mean, there's promoters that have been doing events for generations. They're not going to stop just because some other promoter is out there putting together their promotion. So my thought is, and my kind of hope is that really is that they'll come in, they'll do their thing, they'll provide competition because to me, competition is good for any business. It raises the level of the desire and the fire in the other competitors. That if a promoter out there maybe gets a little lazy and there's the new kid on the block, they're going to want to do better. So if that fire is not there, let's say on a given day for a Frank Warren or a Bob Arum or an Eddie Hearn or something like that, that seeing them on their backs going to make them do a better job, and that's good for us as fans. It's good for us as media members, and that's how I look at it. So I say to the folks at TKO, I'd like to see them be successful. Let them give it their best shot. If they do somehow manage to achieve, what you say to take things over, then that means they're probably doing a good job because that means that they're making good fights and the public is gravitating to watching those events and paying for those events, and the fighters are feel like they're being treated appropriately and they're getting the right matches and all that kind of stuff. But that's a long range goal. So any notion that they're going to take over, even if it did happen, which I'm doubtful of, it's a long play. It's not happening overnight, and lots of stuff can happen in this business. I've seen too many promoters come and go who come in with grandiose plans and say we're doing this and we're doing that, and they're swept out like yesterday's news. In a matter of months or years. I don't think that will happen because the folks that are doing this TKO, they are entrenched in the entertainment business, in the combat sports business, and they have a lot of money behind them. Obviously, the Saudis with their backing, that is a very significant factor. And but people like Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh and Nick Khan and Ari Emanuel, these are people that play to win. They're not coming in just to dick around and give it their best shot. They're looking to do their thing. And, I feel it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited about it, to be honest with you, to see what they can do.
When you talk about there being, or it's going to be rather, a long-term project and plan for them to be able to reach the point of which they want, I'm sure you listened to Turki Al-Sheikh's live stream on Twitter the other
Mm-hmm.
day. And I've seen some of Dana White's comments recently where both of them have said, he's got events committed to for the next 18 months. So, people starting to assume, does that mean maybe he's going to work with everybody for the next 18 months and hope that TKO Boxing's in that position where they can start to kind of run their own events as opposed to doing as many Riyadh season events as what we've seen. Do you think that's the path of which they want to go down?
I think that's reasonable. First of all, I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. So while Turkey is busy doing Riyadh season events and Ring Magazine events and that sort of thing, at the same time, you'll see Dana and the TKO people, doing what they've been hired basically to do by the Saudis, which is to formulate this promotion company, run the company, sign the fighters, put on the events. Remember, this is not TKO putting in their own money. If you listen to like their earnings call, Mark Shapiro, who's one of their top executives, was talking very specifically, and Dana said it, and it was also, I believe, in the initial press release. The Saudis are paying TKO a fee of $10 million a year to administer and create and oversee and do the events for the company. And they're the ones that are going to spend the money on the cost. So when it comes to like what it costs to do an event, that's not coming out of their pocket, as opposed to like when Dana and the UFC folks do a UFC event. UFC's, they foot the bill and they see what their profit and loss is on an event. In this particular case, they're going to get their fee, and the budget's going to get set by the Saudis. So, the fighters who make money, whatever expenses are, that's in addition to the money that the Saudis are going to pay out to TKO. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. So I know the people, there's been a lot of conversations about fighter pay because that's always been a big issue in the UFC compared to maybe what the top stars in boxing make. The UFC gets to set the prices when they negotiate with the fighters in the UFC of what they're going to be paid. In terms of what's going on with TKO, that's going to be what the Saudis set the budget at, not TKO. I mean, ultimately, that's where the money's coming from. So it is going to be a little bit different. Well, I say everybody should just have an open mind and sort of see how it plays out. Nobody really knows what's going to be just yet.
Obviously, the one thing I'm interested to get your thoughts on is the Ali Act and how they'll look to navigate that. How serious of an obstacle you think that will be? Because it certainly speaks in again what Dana White's had to say. He's mentioned the importance of cracking the American market. Uh, the Ali Act obviously being, very serious over there. How do you think they look to navigate that obstacle?
Well, it's not going to be easy. When look, when they did the rollout of this announcement, where they announced just that they were doing the deal with the Saudis and they were going to have this create this promotional entity, and they mentioned about the $10 million, and they talked about how the athletes that they sign are going to have access to their performance institutes that are in various places around the world, and those types of things. But that is a far cry from here's the first date of our first event, here's our roster, here's our broadcast deal. Dana, and so that day I had like a 30-minute interview with Dana, and he said, yeah, look, we're sort of putting the cart before the horse because we're making this big announcement. We still got a lot of work to do. And then he started talking about different things related to the promotion of how they plan to do things. And I mentioned to him, I brought up very specifically, you're going to have to deal with the Muhammad Ali Reform Act. Now, for those who don't know, that's a federal law in the United States that was passed, some 20 years or so ago, that creates a firewall between promoters and managers, and has a lot of language that is oriented to protect the boxer. That particular law, because of the lobbying efforts of UFC, does not apply to UFC. So they can do things differently in terms of business. So when you hear about the fact that, say, the boxing payouts to the fighters, let's say you're doing a big event, a pay-per-view, let's say, typically speaking, not every deal, but by and large, the split's probably like 80-20 in favor of the fighter. Well, in UFC, a lot, and I don't cover UFC. This is what I'm told and what I've read, so I don't know hands-on, but it's kind of like the opposite. That it's almost like, maybe 20-30% to the fighters and the rest of the company. And that's because they're not obligated under the Ali Act. So when I asked Dana about the Ali Act, he says, yeah, we're going to have to deal with that. Now, there could be a movement to have the United States Congress try to repeal that. Remember, Dana White, is a close personal friend of the United States president, who attends UFC events. And there's always the possibility that they could put that on the political agenda to try to have that repealed. I believe there's probably a lot more important things that need to be handled by our United States Congress for the betterment of the United States of America than the Muhammad Ali Reform Act being repealed. But that's a different conversation. I'm only making the point that they're obviously aware of that. They know that it's something to be dealt with. And also, when he talks about we're going to do our own rankings, we're going to do our own belt, that's something that's prohibited by the Muhammad Ali Reform Act. So they're going to have to deal with that. But again, I don't disrespect them. These are smart people. They understood what they were getting into. It's not like they decided, hey, we're going to do this gazillion-dollar deal for TKO Boxing to be involved with the Saudis. And, oh, shit, we forgot about the Muhammad Ali Reform Act. I mean, they're not dumb. They know it exists, and, they'll see how they can navigate it.
Moving away from all things TKO and the Muhammad Ali Act, Canelo, his Saudi deal, the Crawford fight. Now, obviously, we know that he's got William Skull on the horizon on May the 3rd. Obviously, May the 2nd, you have the New York show with all of those super lights and now welterweights featuring on that card. But what do you know about the deal itself for Canelo, and who specifically are the names that he will be lined up to potentially face? Obviously, we know Skull, Crawford later this year, but looking at next year, is it the winner of maybe a Better Be a Bivol trilogy? Is it that Benavidez fight so many fans have wanted? What do you know about who's been mentioned or who's maybe even the contractors' potential names?
Well, as far as what's in the contract, that I don't have knowledge of. I wish I did. So if somebody's out there that hasn't wants to send it to me, you hit me up. In all seriousness, though, look, I think they made the deal knowing that the first fight was William Skull. Obviously, the second fight, if he wins, is going to be against Terrence Crawford. And I think after that, they're going to just play it by ear. I think. I mean, that's not to say there's not names that are named there where they have certain dollar figures assigned and that sort of thing. But I think that you have to look at the landscape because those fights are going to play out over the next, the rest of this year, and you just don't know what's going to be around between now and what happens at the end of the year. In other words, let's say they wanted Benavidez and somehow Benavidez, retired or got hurt or lost or something like that. So that changes the dynamic of who you may fight. So I don't think there's anything real specific about that at the moment. I think that's sort of like we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
On the theme of Benavidez, I did see some comments from Eddie Hearn where he said they'd had small, like minor talks with PBC about Callum Smith potentially facing one of Benavidez or Morrell. Do you know or have any knowledge on that situation, Dan?
Well, I know that from talking to the Benavidez people is that if they're not going to get the Canelo fight next, and they're not going to do, they're not going to get the Bivol fight, which was discussed and was ordered by the WBC, but it seems like that's not going anywhere for a lot of different reasons, and they need to come up with an alternative plan. In talking with David's promoter, Samson Lukowitz, he said they would love to fight Callum Smith. They think that's an attractive fight. They think it's a worthy fight. It would be a guy who now has the WBO interim title. So you have David Benavidez, who's got the WBC interim title. He's got the WBA regular title. My point is, it would certainly, the winner of that fight would be sort of like not only the organizational mandatory for the various belts that they would hold the winner in terms of the secondary type titles, but it would also sort of be like the people's mandatory because Callum Smith comes off a very good, solid, great fight against Josh Buatsi, and he won the fight. You got Benavidez, who's doing his thing. And so the winner of that fight would be a very logical opponent for, either Canelo if he decides to come back up and wait, or the guy that emerges if there is in fact a trilogy fight between Beterbiev and Bivol. The winner just is in a great spot. And on top of that, it's probably a good, entertaining fight. And Callum Smith's never ducked anybody, and he's given, even in the, he's got 2 losses, right? He got knocked out by Beterbiev, and he lost a decision to Canelo Alvarez. So it's not like, he's a bum or anything. He's probably one of the top, 4 or 5 light heavyweights in the world. I don't think that's a question about it. And so that's a good fight. That's what you want to see. I mean, if you can't get the champ, and the champ at super middleweight's not willing to fight you at this point, you go after the next best guy. So if you're not fighting Beterbiev, and you're not fighting Bivol, and you're not fighting Canelo, you tell me at this exact moment in time, who would you say is the next best guy at light heavyweight? I think it's Callum Smith based on that win over Buatsi and good performances besides that.
I most would agree with you on that note, Dan. Just moving forwards again, I want to get an understanding from yourself on Alexander Usyk and what's next for him, because obviously we've seen Alex Krashuk say they want to press ahead with a Daniel Dubois fight. Obviously Daniel having to pull out previously from a Joseph Parker fight, but now Joseph Parker has been ordered to face him by the WBO. So what's your understanding of that situation?
That I think is like a murky area right now. I understand they'd like to do the Dubois fight, even though he's got an easy win against Dubois. They perhaps are interested to reclaim the IBF belt that he was sort of forced to give up because of the mandatory situation and the contract that he already had that existed for the rematch against Tyson Fury. But I kind of find that to be like a hollow fight because Alexander Usyk doesn't need the belt to be, yes, he needs it to technically be undisputed, but he already had it. And you're just fighting the guy that they basically stole it from you to give to him. So why should you have to beat him again? Now, that said, all due respect to Daniel Dubois, who got dominated and knocked out and looked absolutely terrible when he fought Alexander in the first time around when they did the fight in Poland. But at least he's got off his ass and he went out there and he earned another shot, right? He won 3 solid big-time fights in a row. He knocked out Gerald Miller, who was undefeated. He stopped Filip Hrgovic in a tremendous battle on cuts to get the interim title. He got elevated. Not his fault. That was part of the deal. And then the coup de grace was he absolutely obliterated Anthony Joshua. So when you go after taking a very harsh loss like he did to Usyk, and you put together those 3 victories in a row, all by knockout, all very impressively, and you're now the guy with the belt that the other guy doesn't have, I get it. But Joseph Parker was the ordered mandatory by the WBO. He won the interim title. To me, and there's nothing against Dubois. Dubois has made some great fights also, but Parker is the fresh fight. That's the fight that never happened. By the way, absolutely hilarious. If you go on, you look on Joe Parker's social media, he put out what I think, like I've seen a million guys call guys out in a million different ways. They curse them out. They talk about their mama. They make threats. They do lunatic things. Joseph Parker made what I thought was maybe the most amazing call out I've ever seen. It was funny. It was inventive. It was not him being a dick about it. It was just really well done. You got to go look at it. He's singing the Shania Twain song, with the video. It was really, really well done. And how do you not love Joe Parker? And he is coming off good wins himself. He's the one that defeated Deontay Wilder. He defeated Zhilei Zhang. And he's been, active over the last couple of years with a lot of. He did have one little span where he didn't fight for a bit. Not of his fault. He said to me he was looking for fights and he just couldn't land one, but he didn't duck anybody. He earned the shot. Dubois had his shot. So to me, I'd like to see the WBO continue to enforce that mandatory for Usyk to give him an opportunity. He deserves it. He's never fought him before, and Usyk's not a guy that ducks anybody. And let Dubois go defend the title, and if he's successful, they can still do that rematch down the road when the mandatory period is up, and still make another big fight like that. So I'm hopeful that it's the Parker fight next. But to my knowledge, nothing has been decided one way or the other, because all I know is this: you cannot have Joseph Parker and Daniel Dubois fight Alexander Usyk at the same time. He can only fight one guy. And so the WBO is saying you're up next for Parker. The Dubois fight is not a mandatory fight. And it's a fight that's already happened with a definitive result. So yes, Dubois is worthy of another shot, but in my opinion, Parker stands in front of the line.
Keeping with the theme of British fighters, I know only Daniel out of that triplets of fighters was is British, but Eubank Benn on the horizon. Just your take as an American tuning in, Dan. Are you as intrigued by this as what those over in the UK are?
I am but I'm not a normal American boxing fan. I mean, this is how I make my living. I'm a junkie. That's my life. But yeah, I mean, the back and forth between the two, I come at it from the perspective as not from a person that is only familiar with Chris Jr. and with Connor, but I remember their fathers fighting each other and how big that was back in the 1990s. So with that in my mind, also, yeah, how could you not be excited? I mean, I can't. I'm trying to think of a time in recent years, in the last 10, 15 years, whatever it's been, where I've seen a non-title fight get this much hype and become this big in terms of what the crowd's going to be, what probably at least in Britain what the pay-per-view is going to be, the just the constant discussion of it, a pretty good undercard. Again, for a non-title fight, that is highly unusual. But it just shows you that the personalities that these two guys have, the craziness of the press conference with the egg, the back and forth, obviously all the business between their fathers. You can't overlook the fact that they were supposed to fight 2.5 years ago and why it was canceled because of Conor Benn's positive drug test. The fight is just like a saga, like a soap opera, and it's going to reach its high note, I guess, when they get in the ring and find out for real, who's going to win that fight, and for family honors and to place its fight in that same sort of folklore, if you will, of what their fathers did 30 years ago.
Who would you make a favourite, Dan? Because bearing in mind, a lot of people are talking about that rehydration clause for Junior, and he struggles over recent years to get down to 160.
Well, he knows about it well ahead of time, so I'm quite confident that Chris is going to work hard to prepare for the fight, and I know just how important this fight is for both these guys because of the father situation and just for bragging rights in Britain and all that. So I'm not that worried about the rehydration clause. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a 10 pounds cushion. Even if you normally might put on 12 or 13, it's not like they can't put on more weight after. They're going to weigh in the morning of the fight, and they're still going to be, probably another 10 hours or 12 hours until they actually get in the ring. So I feel like that's a little bit overblown. So I have no problem making Chris Eubank the favorite in this fight. I mean, maybe Conor Benn will pull it off. He's coming up essentially two weights. He has shown absolutely zero power since his drug suspension. He fought two very lesser guys in the United States, and yes, he won the fights, but he didn't shine, in my opinion. And meanwhile, not to say that Eubank is undefeated and is knocking everybody out or anything like that. He's got his share of losses, but he's fought a much better group of opponents during the course of his career than Conor has. I mean, Conor has never even won like the British title or the Commonwealth title or the European title. At least Eubank has competed in those types of fights, and he's been on the world level a number of times. I mean, he's got the big win and loss, granted, against Liam Smith. So the level of opposition, the experience, the size, that to me makes him the clear favorite in the fight. That's not to say that Conor can't pull it off because he's a much younger man at this point than Chris is. But that's another reason why the fight's very interesting to a lot of people, because while it's logical that Eubank is the favorite, there's something in the back of your mind that says, you know what, maybe the other guy, knows something with the youth and hasn't figured out for some way. So count me in, baby. I'm interested.
My last one for you, Dan, is Gervonta Davis-Lamont Roach. Do we see that rematch next? Obviously, there was a huge clamour for it, given the controversy surrounding their first fight a few weeks back.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I've talked to the camps. They're working towards getting that done. Probably going to be in June, and they're going to do that fight again. It makes sense. It was a draw. The fight did well in terms of like they broke the record for the gate at Barclays Center when they did the. Or I take that back. They were second all time in terms of the gate. They were slightly behind Rolling Stones concert in terms of number of people, in terms of attendance. They broke the record for that building, which has been open for about 12 years or 14 years, something like that. So from that perspective, in terms of economically, it's going to be even bigger than the first fight. And competitively, we now know. And by the way, I might have even been with you on one of the YouTube shows, or maybe I was talking to somebody else. I know I spoke about it on my own podcast. When that fight was first made between Lamont Roach and Tank Davis, a lot of people, most people, pissed all over. It's a shitty fight. He should be fighting this guy. He should be fighting that guy. Who the heck is Lamont Roach? He's a guy coming up in weight. Blah 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 blah. You can go and listen to any number of my comments about it or whatever. I said from day one, stop that. This is a legit fight. This is a solid fight. You may not know much about Lamont Roach, but he's a very good, a very skilled fighter. He's got a lot of dog in him. He knows Tank really well from the amateurs. They fought 2 times, not like he won, but he knows them. He's been around them. They sparred together. He was coached by Tank Davis was coached for a little while by Roach's dad, Lamont Sr. I mean, they know what they're getting into with this fight. They're not scared. I have followed Lamont Roach's career from day one. I've been at many of his fights. I know him and the dad. I knew this was going to be a real fight. That's not to say I was picking him to win, but it did not surprise me one iota that he gave the kind of competition to Tank that he did. And I would imagine that whatever happens in the rematch will be similar. So, yeah, I think the fight's going to happen in the summer. I think it's going to be a much bigger fight than the first one, and I am very much looking forward to seeing them do it again and to see Tank not take a timeout in the middle of a round and take a knee after he gets hit with a jab and the referee roll over like a dog and allow it. Not allowed in boxing.
In the immediate aftermath of the fight, Dan, I was asking people, is that fight now one we should take back to Washington, take it back to kind of where they both came through? Is it now just even bigger than that, though, with no respect to that area? But when you talk about the records they broke going to the Barclays Center, do you think they need to kind of emulate that and push it further, or can it go back to Washington and make it that big in-house fight there?
Well, I mean, the people I've been talking to about this who are involved in, putting it all together, number one, they got to figure out what arenas are available and match it up with the dates and everything. But as I am told, and again, nothing is done yet on this at all, but they're looking about either doing it in Las Vegas or doing it in the DMV district, Maryland, Virginia is what that stands for, which is the home area of both guys. When Tank fought in the Capital One Arena, which is the big arena in the downtown Washington, D.C., where the professional basketball team plays, where the professional ice hockey team plays, where they have the big concerts and where there's lots of college basketball. Tank has the biggest gate in the history of the building. That building's been open for over 20 years. That's where, Mike Tyson fought Kevin McBride in his last fight before coming back to fight Jake Paul, some 20 years later. It's a big time arena, and they broke the record for gate. Also, coincidentally, a Rolling Stones concert was well over $5 million. A Tank fight against Roach, who was also from Washington. Tank's from Baltimore. It's about an hour away by car. So they've got all their fan base here. And that would be a much bigger fight than the Hector Luis Garcia fight, which is the Tank fight that broke the record. Now, Roach, he had his only title defense at 130, did it in Washington, in a small arena, but they did a good crowd there. He's got his own fan base here. He's got some element of popularity. And I guarantee you, and I live in the area, so I'm pretty well versed in the DC, Baltimore sort of boxing scene. No doubt in my mind that fight sells out. That fight does a huge gate, bigger than what they did for the Hector Luis Garcia fight. My only question is, can it do bigger than if they were to take the fight to Las Vegas and put it in like the MGM Grand or put it at the T-Mobile Arena? Because I do say that there would be lots of people, especially in the summertime, that would travel from this area to go to Vegas. The funny thing is, like, I can't tell you how many times I've traveled to Vegas for fights that have involved DC area fighters. And Roach included, who's been on the cards, where we're all on the same flights together. You get on one of those flights and like half the plane is people from DC going out to fight, going out to the fight. I mean, whenever Mayweather would fight. Now, he's not from Washington, but it's a heavily African-American city. He was a hugely popular figure. I would fly to a Mayweather fight. Half the plane was filled with people wearing Mayweather hats and Mayweather shirts and boxing fans. I'd get recognized, and they were all going out to hang for the week. So imagine if it's Tank against Roach, and they're their own local guys. So anyway, the point here is that I can see the fight definitely being in Vegas, but I'm pretty sure they're also looking to see if they can line it up for the DC area, if it makes sense, and they crunch their numbers of what they think they can do in terms of tickets and all that. But either way, it's going to be big.
My last one, just to link in with Tank, I remember in the following days after the first fight with Lamont Roach, some rumours and reports started floating about that Jake Paul's visit to the first fight wasn't just by coincidence. There was maybe something going on in the background for a potential Tank Davis fight. Do you know anything about that? Can you share anything around that?
Yeah, no, they were definitely talking. They were absolutely 100% talking. Tank Davis won that fight against Lamont Roach. I think it would have been a very good bet that they were going to do a fight between Jake Paul and Tank Davis. No question, they had conversations. Remember, Tank is represented by Al Heyman. the people involved with Jake Paul, Nikki Sabadari, and that whole team. Remember, they were trying to do the fight between Jake and Canelo. If and they had gotten to a point where the deal was agreed to, and then he ended up signing to do the business with Turkey. But the conduit between Canelo and MVP, Jake's company, was Al Heyman and his team, because that's the guy that had been representing and done the last few Canelo fights. So they got to know each other during that period of time. Yeah, and they were definitely having talks about that. I don't think anything was like official. I mean, obviously you'd have to figure out, is this going to be an official fight? Is the commission going to sanction it? I mean, there's one thing about the weight disparity, but they did, the Texas Commission did sanction the Tyson fight, even though they made some tweaks to the rules. And Mike hadn't fought for 20 years. But Tank, was a 135-pound champion, never fought above 140. He got Jake Paul, who's, 200 pounds, fought Tyson like well over 200 pounds. And that's a lot. I mean, weight classes do this for a reason, but people would be, I mean, look, in the day, that would sell a fight like that, whether it was pay-per-view or they got a big number from Netflix or whatever. But whatever, not happening now, because they're going to go towards a rematch with Roach, because that fight, it has to get cleaned up. What happened because of Tank's, his knee that was never called.
Dan, it's a pleasure as always to catch up. I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you soon. Yeah, thanks for speaking to me on Boxing News.
You got it, my man. Anytime.